A while back on the channel, I showcased CubeDoom, a fascinating GameCube source port of Doom 1's shareware episode that served as a proof of concept for how the game could run on Nintendo's GameCube. The thing with CubeDoom is that for the longest time, it was considered lost media. It had a website back in the late 2000s, yet sometime after that, the entire thing just disappeared, and the source port faded from view. For years, people speculated over its whereabouts. It was only in 2023 that a playable copy of the port was rediscovered among many other GameCube homebrew programs and posted to the internet. But really, there isn't that much out there about this port, or the interesting things about it, outside of a few very brief videos. When I posted that original video, there were a number of issues with the copy of the game I was playing. The biggest was that the sounds in the game would lag and desync pretty aggressively. I promised in that video that if I could get the game playable with sound, I would do a full playthrough, or as close to as I could. Well, that day is today. I'm going to play through CubeDoom, I'm going to showcase what it has going for it, its shortcomings, and maybe even give you a flavour of what Doom on Nintendo Gamecube could have been. And yes, I'm fully aware that there are Game Boy Advance versions that you can play through the Game Boy Advance player, so let's dive in and play as much of this as I can. So one of the first things I want to say about the GameCube port here is that it's very unstable. Sometimes when you try and load it up, it will just outright refuse. Sometimes it will load up fine. And then sometimes you get thrown into this loading screen here, which is very quaint, very cutesy. And yeah, unfortunately, none of those websites work anymore. Well, except for the id Software one, but this is Doom on the GameCube, and as I mentioned last time, there is no music here. Unfortunately, it is all just in-game audio. We'll discuss that though as we move through the experience. You can see here we can load into Knee Deep in the Dead. Unfortunately, this only ever came with one episode, and that was the shareware episode. And you can see I'm playing on Ultraviolence here. Now, it should be noted that, much like loading into this, it is a bit unstable, and it generally plays fine until the end of a level, and then every now and then it will just hard crash, and when it hard crashes, there's no way to kind of continue, because guess what? There's no loading or saving in this version of Doom. Yeah, CubeDoom doesn't really make use of the GameCube memory card, so if you're going to play through it, you kind of need to shoot through it in one go, which is fine because there's only one episode here. Now, in terms of control, you're probably wondering to yourself, well, how does this work on a GameCube controller? The left analog stick, it controls how fast you move and what direction you move in, so you're doing both on one there, which I'm not a huge fan of, and that's kind of why my movements in this are a bit more exaggerated than they probably would be if I was using the 360 controller. The A button is for shooting, the Z button is for bringing up the map. Use the shoulder buttons to strafe left and right. The B button opens the doors, while the X and the Y buttons, they help you to shuffle through your weapons. And that's pretty much it. The D-pad doesn't do anything, and the GameCube doesn't have a second trigger button to go alongside the Z, so there's only 3 up top. Now, in terms of actual controls, it takes a bit of getting used to. You do have to kind of get used to using this setup because it isn't super intuitive. And you'll also have noticed, if you're a keen player of classic Doom, this is based off the Boom source port. Yeah, this is pretty primitive compared to some of the other ports that we've seen over the years. The absence of music is a disappointment, but the performance is very solid here. As you probably expect, GameCube more than able to handle classic Doom, and we probably wouldn't have expected anything else. But that is Hangar out of the way. But to me, it's just fascinating to see classic Doom here running on the Nintendo GameCube. And as I mentioned in the original video, there was an issue with the audio desyncing. Now, from the research I was able to sort of find, and trust me, there is not a lot about this port out in the wild. A lot of the discussion around it sort of talks about it in the sense of it doesn't exist. And it's only in like the last year where people have finally been able to get their hands on it again, where people have been testing it out, and even there isn't that much discussion. So I was pretty much on my own trying to troubleshoot the audio issues. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to let you kind of listen to some of the audio clips because they are quite crunchy in this version. And what I mean by that is they are low kind of sample rate, and you'll see what I mean. I'll let you listen for a minute. Following this port, though, has been super fascinating because, as I mentioned in the opening blurb, and as I mentioned in the original video, this was considered lost media. And I'm not saying that as in, like, well, people kind of overlooked it. It really did kind of just disappear there for a while. There was a video or two posted on Reddit over the years, sort of showcasing it. But in reality, getting your hands on it was pretty much nigh on impossible. Like, it was very hard for people to find the CubeDoom assets and bring them into a GameCube homebrew. And it's very surprising to me that no one else stepped in and made their own version. If you do a Google search for CubeDoom, you'll find that a lot of the discussions are about people talking about, does it even exist? How do we find it? And even the people on various forums who've managed to piece it together, they had a very difficult time bringing this back from the dead, because I think the end story of this was that it turned up in like a collection of homebrew games and apps on some random website. I think that's how people managed to get it back. And I'm really grateful that they did that, because seeing Doom run on GameCube is such a treat. I know that for a lot of people this is just Doom, why would you care? I used to love the GameCube back in the day, and I'm telling you, I would have played the socks off of this version. As I've covered in a lot of the videos, though, this only ever arrived on the original Xbox, and not even as its own package. It arrived as an extra as part of the Doom 3 Collector's Edition and Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil. But in terms of performance, like, this is incredibly solid. I mean, obviously, you would expect this. The GameCube, more than capable machine, and Doom by this point was pretty old hat, but it's the fact that it's here, it's running, and this is running on real GameCube hardware. Getting this to work in an emulator, for some reason, was very tricky. I wasn't actually able to make it work with Dolphin, which is strange because Dolphin's a very competent emulator. You can kind of hear the chain gun here as well. It has a very crunchy sort of sound to it. It's not particularly nice. I'm guessing if you were playing on a TV speaker, you might not notice it as much, but listening to it through my headphones as I'm, playing through here, it does kind of get a bit rough, and that's fine, because I view this more as a proof of concept that if someone came in afterwards and implemented a full classic Doom experience on GameCube, it would work. And I think you could get all of the retail Doom experiences in if you really wanted to. And when I was sort of looking around in the original video to sort of see if anyone else had played through it, if anyone else had commented on it, it was very hard to find any real coverage of Doom on Nintendo GameCube. So I guess part of the reason I'm doing this is just to sort of show that yes, this version actually existed, and yes, you could actually play through it. And with a bit of tinkering and a bit of sort of messing around, you can get it to work. And if you do have a GameCube that has homebrew, I would strongly recommend giving this a try, because I think that just being able to say you've played Doom on a GameCube that isn't the Game Boy Advance version, I think that's how many people can really say that over the years. As you can kind of see from the footage, sometimes getting precise controls is a bit tricky, because obviously all of the controls are tied to the one analog stick. Moving forward isn't so bad, but when you kind of have to stop and then turn, and then you have to remember to strafe, it does get a bit sort of cumbersome, and you do have to kind of take a few seconds to recalibrate yourself sometimes. The GameCube is a very interesting console in terms of its controller, because it has two analog sticks, but the second one is the C stick, which isn't particularly an analog control stick. It is, but it isn't, in the sense that it's usually used for other purposes, and it's not super well defined as a sort of physical entity on the controller for dual analog controls. So, an interesting little glitch here that I did find when playing through this, and I had to discover this one on my own. When a weapon runs out of ammo, or sometimes when you try to change weapons, the game kind of freaks out a little bit. And as you saw there, it was constantly raising and lowering different weapons. It wouldn't settle. It was kind of like it didn't know what to do with the weapon change after I moved off the chain gun. And the only way that that tends to fix itself is when I end up sort of forcing it to switch to the rocket launcher, which obviously far from ideal, because sometimes you're in the throes of battle and you really don't want to be pulling out the rocket launcher unless you really, really have to. But overall performance has been pretty unremarkable, which is probably the nicest thing I can say, because obviously a lot of these console ports from the 1990s, they have a lot of performance issues, and luckily those are not present here. Performance seems to be one of the stronger aspects of this port, and it's important to point out that this port is not fully featured. This is based off the Boom source port, which is very, very old. Even at this time, it was quite old. So, of course, you know, it's not going to have a lot of the bells and whistles. You can go into the options, you can change the text color to normal Doom red if you really, really want to. I kind of left it as it was, though, because I thought it was quite charming. I think you really get to see the Boom sort of color system for the HUD bar at the bottom very often these days. So I thought it was kind of nice that that was the default option here. Now you can hear the crackling as the chain gun's shooting. Like I said, it seems that the audio is probably one of the biggest casualties jumping over here. And I'm sure if, you know, someone was to come in and redo this, they would be able to fix that no problems. But of course, this was pretty much abandoned. The development didn't really continue on this port. You can only play the shareware version. I'm sure if someone really wanted to, they could find a way to put the original Doom into it. But to be honest, if you were going to do a modern version of CubeDoom or any kind of Doom source port, you would probably just start from the ground up, I think. There's a lot better bases to build from, I think, in 2025. With that out of the way, we are going to head to the secret exit. It is a bit eerie playing this without the music, but then again, the PlayStation 2 version that I played a long while back, that didn't have any music either, so maybe it's just the way that these ports are sort of constructed. Music is probably the last thing that they focus on, which makes sense. The other thing to consider as well about a potential GameCube version of classic Doom like this, imagine the kind of connectivity things they could have got up to if they'd had this link up with the Game Boy Advance versions of Doom and Doom 2. Because, in case you don't know, the GameCube had a whole bunch of connectivity ideas. So, for example, if you want a game on the Game Boy Advance, sometimes if you want a corresponding game on the Nintendo Gamecube, sometimes you could link them up and have unlockables. You could send items across. So like in Wind Waker, for example, you could use the Tingle Tuner. In Metroid Fusion, you could unlock suits, and in Metroid Prime on the Gamecube, you could unlock suits. And then there was also other situations, like with Legend of Zelda 4 Swords, where you could use the Game Boy Advance link cable to actually play the game on your Game Boy Advance. Obviously, I don't think they would have gone that far with all this, because playing, Doom on the Game Boy Advance to play it on the GameCube counterintuitive, because you can just play it on the GameCube or the Game Boy Advance. But it is kind of interesting to speculate just how that could have been formed if they'd had a more kind of cohesive vision for Nintendo consoles during that time, if the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube games had sort of had the ability to link up, or if there was even a GameCube game at all, let's be honest. Alternate music tracks for each level, maybe different sorts of skyboxes, maybe giving you a custom weapon, who knows? Or maybe just exclusive levels, I mean, from Final Doom, because there's a ton of levels they could have just kind of offered up as like, well, you've linked the two up so you can unlock this on the GameCube version. Also, split screen would have been pretty cool on GameCube. Obviously, I'm not saying this was ever a thing. I'm just sort of speculating, because it's fun to speculate about what could have been had someone at id Software said, you know what, we should put Doom out on the GameCube. And clearly they were willing to work with Nintendo, because the Game Boy Advance got 2 Doom games. And obviously Wolfenstein 3D turned up in the end as well, although don't really want to talk about that one too much. Wolfenstein 3D on Game Boy Advance is pretty nasty work. Like, it's definitely not the way I'd be playing Wolfenstein 3D. As we're playing through this level here, you can see that, all the enemies from the PC version are here. We're able to take them out, and hooray, the audio is not desyncing. So the issue with that, I ended up finding out, was it was a mixture between both the homebrew software that I've got on my GameCube and also the file for Doom. There was an issue with sort of audio delay. So, for example, you can hear ThatNukemGuy shooting his gun here, but what would end up happening, as the more you kind of kept the game open, the longer that delay got. So at the start you wouldn't notice it, but play for like 20-30 minutes and you'd suddenly start hearing shotgun blasts like 5 seconds later, and it really made playing through CubeDoom originally a bit of a chore, because I'm very kind of sensitive to like misaligned audio like that, so it genuinely was a bit of a deal breaker. Had to be careful there, very nearly pushed the A button. I'm just going to let you sort of enjoy the kind of ambience and the crinkly sounds, just so you can kind of get an idea for how this feels. I'll jump back in at the start of the next level. So I just want to see here if I can jump over this gap. Let's see if I can actually do this in the first attempt. I can. Excellent. So the controls aren't that balked on this one once you kind of get a handle on them. And that's the end of Military Base, the secret level. Again, I need to point out that sometimes at the end of these levels, it just randomly crashes, and we haven't seen it yet, but I've not been able to get to the final level at any stage, so we'll see how far I can get with this. I guess the big question as well with Nintendo and its software is, would anyone have actually bought Classic Doom on GameCube? GameCube sold about 23 million units worldwide, I think that's the number, and I feel like a lot of people buying GameCubes, they probably wouldn't have gone out to buy a classic version of Doom, especially because this was in the age before digital purchases, where, you know, you can make smaller digital purchases. So I don't know how they would have been able to justify like a full price release of this in that generation. Obviously, they could have bundled together all the retail packages, but even then, I think that would have been a bit of a difficult sell because by like 2002, 2003, Doom was around 9, 10 years old already, so it was kind of old hat. And that might explain why the PlayStation 2 didn't get its own sort of compilation of id Software, although I guess an id Software anthology would have worked on the GameCube and PlayStation 2, having like all of the id Software games in one bundle up to Quake. But then that might have been a lot of work, and they might have felt that that wasn't worth the hassle. So I am going to try jumping onto this sidewalk over here. In the PC version, you can run over here and you can skip pretty much the entire blue door section. No. And the problem is the way that strafing works in this game. Strafe running is kind of a bit of a pain. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to make that, to be honest. Who shot me? You shot me. See if I can make it. See, the problem is once you kind of touch the analog stick, ThatNukemGuy just sort of starts spinning. I'm sure you could do this, but it's just very, 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 very difficult with this setup. Now we're heading into my least favourite part of this level. The maze here has always kind of baffled me. I don't really get much out of this, and to be honest, I always kind of feel that it's just here to kind of trap new players, because new players will be like, oh, maze, not realising that they literally just have to walk down that pathway there. You can see here it's not the original layout of this room, thank goodness. Nintendo would not be okay with that. I also need to point out that when we get to the end of this level, unfortunately, you can see that is the crash screen. Basically, there is a fatal error that occurs when it tries to do the sort of effect where the screen melts, and it basically ends the experience here. Now obviously I want to kind of keep going further, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to replay through the game and try to see how far I can get with a run on a slightly lesser difficulty. So here I've had to play through the game on I'm Too Young to Die. I'm kind of hoping that if I take things out of the level, aka the enemies, it might kind of help things out. Unfortunately, on the way to this, it crashed after the third level anyway, so it's, like I mentioned earlier on in the video, it's an unfortunate side effect of the state that this source port was left in, that you don't really kind of get to experience the whole thing. And unfortunately, when I'm playing through this, I'm able to play this level, the 6th level, and the 7th level, but at no stage have I been able to get the final level 2 load through. And it's one of the big shortcomings of this version, because there's no way to load or save. It means that every time that happens, you've got to play through the game again, and obviously after about the 4th, 5th attempt, it gets a bit cumbersome, because you're like, well, there's nothing else to really see here. But luckily, you know, able to get all the way to the end of Computer Station, which I think is pretty cool. You know, like, that's 8 levels of Doom on GameCube. Would have been nice to kill off the Barons, but technical shortcomings galore. The main thing for me, I guess, is that this kind of just showcases that Doom could have worked on GameCube. I feel like one of the things with these ports, especially on these consoles like GameCube, which never got an official Doom release of its own, it's just nice to know that had there been sort of desire from within the company to make it happen, This easily could have been a thing, and it also kind of opens the door to other first-person shooters that could have made the jump to GameCube. Now, I would hear mention Duke Nukem, but we all know that by this point, Duke Nukem was already one foot in the grave, so it's kind of pointless speculating what a Duke Nukem 3D would have looked like on GameCube. Another thing as well is it really does look nice, this version. So unlike on the PlayStation 2, where I kind of felt there was a bit of sort of smoothing going on, here it doesn't seem to really be a big issue. It looks pretty clean, the image is coming through pretty sharp, and partially that might be down to the fact that I'm using a HD converter for this, but also I just think, you know, even looking on the normal cables, it looks really nice, and it's just a shame there's no music for players to kind of enjoy. So I guess as we head to the back end of this level and we head towards Computer Station, it's a good time for me to sort of give my evaluation on playing this, because I've put about a good 6-7 hours into this version of Doom, and I have to say, you know, even though it's basic, even though it's got like very limited customization, even though I feel that, you know, the shareware version alone is a bit disappointing, it's really fun. Like, the controls are take a lot of getting used to, but then again, they also did on the PlayStation 2, and I feel that they work slightly better here. I also feel that as a proof of concept, this definitely does a decent job of just kind of giving you that Doom experience on GameCube. Performance is very solid. The unfortunate thing with the sounds is that they are very crunchy, and you can hear that without music it's even more obvious. I feel like had there been some music in play here, that would have been much more hidden, but it's a big shortcoming. You'll also notice that the rad suit doesn't go green when we collect it. It makes sort of judging when that ends a bit more of a trial and error affair. I don't know if I would recommend everyone rush out and buy a GameCube to experience this one, and the main reason I say that is because this is in such a sort of half-finished state that I find it very hard to sort of recommend this to anyone but the most enthusiastic of Doom players. But as I said earlier on, being able to say that you've played through Doom on the GameCube, a dedicated GameCube version of Doom, how many Doom players will ever get to really say that? And not just that, it's great for thought exercise, because when I was a kid, I used to wish they would release Doom onto the GameCube, the PlayStation 2, and seeing it running natively on these consoles, seeing it kind of perform this well, it just makes me feel like, yeah, the things I wanted, they could have happened if someone in the suit section had, wanted to make a bit of money. I definitely don't think Doom 3 would have been able to make the jump to GameCube though, and I guess that probably was the big barrier, because the only reason it showed up on original Xbox in the first place was because they needed a sort of caveat to throw out for people who bought the collector's edition of Doom 3 and also the Resurrection of Evil. But I can spoil it for you. I think I mentioned it earlier on as well. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get the final level to work with the Barons of Hell on it. Unfortunately, it seems that whenever it tries to load into that level, it freaks out and it just will not load, no matter which difficulty I make my way to that level on. So unfortunately, this isn't going to be quite a complete run, but I think it's going to give you a good taste of Doom on GameCube. But this has been an almost complete playthrough of Knee Deep in the Dead from Doom 1 on Nintendo GameCube. Let me know what you thought of this. Did you like what you saw? Would you play a whole Ultimate Doom version on Nintendo GameCube like this? And what do you think of CubeDoom overall? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.